Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. I am absolutely delighted to be able to host this conversation with not only my dear friend, but also the interim president of Montgomery College, Dr. Charlene Dukes. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation today over a few topics, but probably what's most important is that I want the college community, both internally and externally, to come and know and love this woman as much as I do. Not only because she is a friend, but more importantly, she is a powerhouse in the world of leadership, and particularly that around community colleges. So let me start off by saying, welcome, Charlene, Dr. Dukes. I'm glad to have you here. Looking forward to our time together over the next maybe 45 minutes or so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pollard. It's a delight to be here on the one hand, and certainly, I share in the sadness of everyone at your leaving, taking a phenomenal position in the state of Nevada, but just the stellar work and the legacy that you leave at Montgomery College across the state of Maryland and certainly across the nation.
Oh, you're most kind. And I want to tell the audience a little bit about you. I have some notes here because this is certainly, while I appreciate that, this is really about you because Montgomery College is so fortunate and the Board of Trustees was so wise to ask you, and I'm so grateful that you accepted their invitation to step into this role. You have 42 years of experience in higher education, 13 years as president of our sister college, Prince George's Community College right up the road. And more importantly, when you retired from that organization last year in 2020, you were recognized across the state and nation for your leadership roles in so many spaces, both in terms of the wide-ranging work you've done at Prince George's Community College, but also the work that you've done in the higher education space for community colleges, in the K-12 space that you've done in terms of leadership roles there. And while our roles have overlapped a lot, what I think is really important, I wanted to start off by maybe asking you to tell folks, you get this call from the board chair who says, Dr. Dukes, we'd like to invite you to step in and to do this role. Why? Why'd you say yes? What made you think, this is something I might want to do for a little bit of time, which I know is very clear as well.
Well, Dr. Pollard, and I too will certainly respect the nature of this conversation, and we are friends. We've been colleagues and friends for such a long time. And what I want everyone to know is that my commitment to community colleges and to higher education did not end with retirement. I've had the opportunity to serve as a consultant across a number of areas since I left Prince George's on August the 9th, 2020. And so when the call came, for me, it was yet another opportunity to serve the state of Maryland, albeit for a short period of time, and to be able to continue to give as we think about the role of community colleges across our state, across our region, across our nation, and to think about the service that we still have yet to do for thousands of students who depend upon us. And probably even more so as we emerge from this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. I think your point is so well taken because there's so many similarities, obviously, while you are retired from Prince George's Community College. There's a lot of similarities between our institutions, both in terms of the work you did there, but also this impact that both organizations have in the community. Would you talk a little bit about where you see some of the similarities between the students and communities that we've served in our organizations, and maybe even move to that last point that you just made about this post-pandemic reality that we're in, that so many of the colleges are having to respond to. What are some of your thoughts in those spaces?
Well, and maybe if you'll allow me, I'll start a little earlier in my own life. I remind individuals, audiences all the time that people tend to see us as we are, as presidents, but they don't really know our histories very much. And I come from a large family. I have 8 brothers and sisters. Grew up in a 4-room home, not a 4-bedroom home, but I grew up with a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, really not a dining room. It had the kitchen table in it, and 2 bedrooms. My parents had one, and the 9 of us had the other. And for anyone who came to visit us from the South, predominantly the Carolinas, that we would just scooch over in the bed and make room for them. 2 of my brothers slept in the bottom bunk bed, 3 slept in the top bunk bed, and my sisters and I shared a double bed, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And that was really my life until I went to college and did not even recognize that if I rolled over, I was not going to touch anyone. And so what stayed with me around that was the need and the necessity to always think about those who needed our help, our assistance. And we grew up in a family where our family motto was one for all and all for one. And what I've tried to do is exhibit that same kind of care and attention during my entire tenure in higher education. And so what I think that means is we look at the similarities of our institutions. It's about who we serve. Serving students who are first generation college, who are low income, and in some cases who have been counted out in what we call this sort of journey of life. And that our role as presidents is to ensure that they have access to every service. It is from an equity-minded perspective, and that we are all there to see about the success of students. Now, within that, we understand that we are also there to ensure that we have brought the brightest minds and the hardest workers to our institution in the form of faculty, staff, administrators, and that we do so in partnership with the Board of Trustees, the governing body of the institution, and our greater community, whether it's local government, state government, community leaders, community activists, because we want the same things, I think, for our students that we wanted for ourselves when we were walking in their shoes. And that's something that's always been important to me and will never go away.
I love this perspective that you raised early on about equity, because Montgomery College is really, I think, in a lot of ways defined by this ethos around equity and inclusion. We call ours this idea of notion of radical inclusion, that we're so deliberate in practice, policy, and promise around the work that we do of serving students, but lifting up, and I think oftentimes those narratives that oftentimes are forgotten. Thank you so much, because I love hearing people's stories about what brought them to this space that they're in, that helped them become the people that we are. And inevitably, that what we bring with us informs how we approach this work. I do know that the Board of Trustees has been very articulate in their commitments around Montgomery College becoming an anti-racist organization. And I know that you have been at the forefront of a lot of conversations in this space. I saw your wonderful conversation that you facilitated with Professor Kendi maybe almost a year ago now, but also the work that you've been doing, both when you were a convener of the Roundtable, when you've been actively mentoring through Lakin, your work in Aspen, all of these different spaces. Talk to me about how you think equity and inclusion, and maybe why it's so critical right now that community colleges are engaged in this work, because I think that there is a profound moment that we're in, and I think community colleges have a space or occupy a space that others may not right now.
You know, I think that community colleges really represent the ongoing nature and continuing advent of the middle class. And you know that the United States of America is built on the middle class, even as we don't discount historical perspectives, as we've gone through this last year with a keen focus on racial equity and social justice. The issue is that we have to understand from an equitable sort of mindedness standpoint it's about race, it's about gender, it's about socioeconomic status, it's about abilities, it's about adults who don't have the opportunities to pursue the kinds of dreams, hopes, and aspirations that current circumstances don't allow to occur. So it is really looking across our institutions and understanding who we're serving and understand why they wanted to attend our institutions and what they expect from us as they think about their own journeys, their own trajectories. And so when we think about equity And it's about, do we have not just all of the support services in place? Do we have the right support services in place? And do we have the data that we look at on a regular basis that tells us how all students are faring across our institutions? Are we bringing in faculty and staff and administrators who support the journey, who are champions for the journey? And every day when they walk into an office, either virtually or face to face, are they thinking about what their role is and the kind of impact that they can have on not just a student, but a family, a community, a state, and a nation? Those are the things that I believe that sometimes get lost in the rhetoric of discussion, but it is up to us as college leaders and boards of trustees to ensure that those things stay front of mind for us every day.
I love this idea. And I think part of that work for us at the college has really been thinking about how students experience Montgomery College when they come into our organizations. We've been doing a lot of work around this idea of starting smart when people come in, intentionally designing those experiences so the students come in one way into the organization, they experience it, and it's designed around them, not around us and our interest as employees of the institution. And that so resonates with the point that you're making here. One of the areas that we've been spending a lot of time on as a college thinking about is around advising. And I know that you have some deep competency in this space because your background in student affairs and student services is profound, leading an organization who is also an ATD organization thinking about this work. What really informs, I think about you and that young woman who showed up in college, leaving the room with your siblings and coming into a college space and understanding how to navigate that. How does that inform, how does your life experiences inform the way you think about how colleges have to show up right now in helping new students navigate the organization?
I think that, one of the things that we have to always continuously think about and be very much aware of are even the unintended practices and processes that we have that create these barriers for students. And one of them, I believe wholeheartedly, is language. That we have adopted this language in higher education, and we assume that when potential students and even current students enter our doors or continue to enter our doors, that they understand our language. So how many times have we said to a student, have you applied? And the student said, yes, I registered. And we assume that that means that the student has made application and registered for classes, when in reality, what they may have meant is I went on your site and I either clicked a box that said I was interested in receiving some information, or I only completed an application. We talked to them about credits. Most of our students are first generation, which means that they come from families who've not had the kind of experiences with post-secondary education that we may have had. And how do we think about the language that we use when they come in? How do we think about the processes we have or the decisions that we make? That students can't show up to class late. They can't have an excuse for something. And certainly when we were in a physical space pre-pandemic, if the bus was late, and a faculty member had a rule around whether or not you could enter a class 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late. But we're giving no consideration to what the personal experience that a student has had and is bringing with him or her to that classroom. So I think that's the first thing that we can look at. I think the second thing is how we collaborate across all of the entities of the college, with each department, each individual in those departments really understanding what their role is relative to the goals and objectives of the institution. I used to, as I walked, and I've walked several campuses because, I was at Prince George's Community College for 25 years, but certainly worked in other places prior to that. And having to explain to individuals that from the very moment that a student steps on our campus in a physical way, or now today in a virtual way, that they are getting an impression of the institution. And it is how we relate to those students that forms either a great impression and they continue the process, or one that says, I don't really think that that's the institution for me. And that we all have a role. The president has a role. And I always say to individuals that it is really an inverted triangle. Many people tend to see the president at the sort of what they call the pinnacle of that triangle, when in reality it's inverted, because we are here to serve and to ensure that everyone has the resources that he or she needs in order to do the job that they came to fulfill. And I used to say in onboarding and orientation that, there were two choices that were made that got you to this point where you're an employee, you're a colleague, and you're moving through the onboarding process. One is that you had and I always say you had the wisdom to apply to Prince George's Community College. So folks have had the wisdom to apply to Montgomery College. And then there was a search committee that saw something in you that said, this might be someone who ascribes to our values, our principles, the work that we're doing. So we're going to bring him or her in for an interview. But even as that person, you had a decision to make too. That you had to make a decision that when you went through that process, you understood who we are, what we're attempting to do, and how we need the experience that you'll bring to us, the talent, the commitment. That we made a choice to offer you the position. You made a choice to accept it. So that this was a mutually beneficial process. It was not one-sided at all. And I think that those are the kinds of things that make us, at least for me in my career, I would say to individuals, no, we're in this together. We're in this together. So that, and I see that same kind of spirit coming from you, from what I know about Montgomery College, and quite frankly, Dr. Pollard, from the work that we've been able to do over the years, not just as colleagues sitting at and during the legislative session, sitting at that table testifying before the House of Delegates or the Senate around things like the DREAM Act. If you recall, we were two of the presidents who were front and center in the state of Maryland because we understood who we served in our communities and how important opening up the college and making it financially feasible for students who were immigrants, not U.S. citizens, but had been here for years, contributing to the economy of our state and our country, could have that access to community colleges. You and I sat at the table as we talked about the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship. So we've done so much work together, both locally, regionally, and nationally. I know for a fact that with the Truth and Racial Healing Centers, I may not have the name exactly correct, but I should say that I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the Meyer Foundation Board. I know that the Meyer Foundation is supporting Montgomery College, Northern Virginia Community College, and Prince George's Community College, and looking at what that Truth and Racial Healing Center can be on community college campuses, because they recognize the kind of work that we're doing for, quite frankly, if you look at the numbers of students that we serve, for hundreds of thousands of students, which again translates to their families, their communities, and their states. So we've worked on grants together. We've been partners in, the TAC grant and so many things, because we recognize together sharing a common geographical boundary across this, what we call, as the greater Washington, D.C. area, what we could do together.
You know what, I think I loved your response, because you talked about this notion of serving the students that we have and understanding and advocating for them, being front and center in their lives, but also being front and center in the communities that we serve as well. And I think a lot about the college for so long. We've been 75 years, we're stepping into our anniversary, and we've had tens of thousands of students who've come to us over the last several years. But our Board of Trustees has really articulated this commitment to expand that outreach. Just as you know, our county executive came forth and recognized that there's a portion of Montgomery County that has not received the level of support and engagement that we in the county believe needs to happen, and that's particularly in the East County of Montgomery County. And as a result of that, we've been very deliberate working with his office and our county council to design a new campus potentially in that region of the county, and more importantly, to think deliberately about what types of programs and services that you might situate there. Now, I know you've done that work. You, working with a collaborative of community colleges, looked at a portion of your service area to expand work in and to collaborate. Could you talk a little bit about how you think about how we might approach this work based on your own experience in this space? Because I do know that there's a lot that we could learn from you and your work to help us inform how we might approach this in the coming weeks and months.
Well, as I think about that, what I think about is, one, you've clearly already determined a need, that there is a portion of the county that you're not serving to the best of Montgomery College's ability, and to the best of the county's ability. And so that's the first thing, to recognize there's a need. The second thing is to have the kind of support behind you from local government that says that not only will we support you in this in terms of advocating for, we'll also support you because we will put our resources there in order to help a portion of our population who, through either public or private transportation, can't see themselves to get to either Germantown, Rockville, or Tacoma Park in ways that make sense. So, while at Prince George's we didn't have 3 campuses, we certainly had, in addition to the Largo campus, 5 what we call degree and extension centers. And it is the same kind of way that we looked at it. Who are we not serving, and who, because of public transportation, cannot get to us in this central part of Prince George's County? So we looked at who we weren't serving. We looked at what the employment outlook was, what business and industry is looking for in terms of skills and credentials that can also lead to not just certificates or certifications, but because of the use of stackable credentials, can lead to associate degrees and baccalaureate degrees. That what we should always be doing is ensuring that there is a pathway for students through all of the kinds of ways in which they engage with us from an educational perspective. If that is continuing education to credit, everything that a student does ought to be able to be stacked so that they can keep going and eventually receive whatever that final credential is that they're looking for: a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a professional degree, a doctorate. And that they should be able to say, if it were not for Montgomery College, where would I be? Because they recognize that every piece of work that I did there was important in terms of building my own transcript. And sometimes, as you know, we have to get out of our own way in order for those things to happen. We have to think very differently now. And I think we have to do so post-pandemic. We started talking about that.
That's exactly where you must have been in my head, because I was thinking, and all of this only becomes more relevant, more crucial as a conversation as we think about a post-pandemic reality, at least, and as you and I've talked about these twin pandemics that we've been grappling with, the pandemic, obviously, of coronavirus, but also the pandemic of racial injustice that we're grappling with as a country. So all of these issues and intersectionality becomes so important to that. And all of a sudden, in the midst of this, we're going to say, let's open up our campuses again. Let's bring people back to work and to work in our campus facilities. Let's bring our students back onto campus to start learning. As you think about your review of this and the literature, I know you're very well aware. I spent a lot of time understanding how other colleges have been preparing for this, what the literature says. Talk to me a little bit about what words of advice that you might share for employees as we start to navigate this return to work conversation. I know that you've been actively engaged with our conversations already. You're going to be leading a planning conversation with our senior administrative leadership team next week on this. But talk to me a little bit about what advice, when you're thinking about our employees coming back into their workspaces, how you might approach that and give them some things to think about.
Well, I would say that there are likely a couple of things. One is to recognize that the commitment that Montgomery College has had to the health and safety of our colleagues who work there and our students in our community will not change. That we will continue to operate based upon science, what the data is telling us, and what our communication is with the local health department, and making the decisions that are in the best interest of those whom we serve. And as presidents, we serve our students and our community, and we also serve those who work beside us every day in this thing called community colleges. And at the same time, we've got to have what I call an appropriate balance, not one that's necessarily 50-50, but an appropriate balance, because we still have those who cannot access what it is that we can provide to them to make their lives better, and again, to help them to see them through to their dreams and aspirations, and to ensure that they too can become productive and contributing members of our communities. So, we'll rely on the science. And we'll also say, how can we do this in such a way that we can continue to serve those who can't get to us virtually? One of the things I was surprised about, and I would dare say that you would have been the same, that we, during the early days of the pandemic, I think many of us did the same thing. We shut down immediately. We learned lessons that even for me, after as long as I've been in higher education, I learned a few things where I would say, if we were face to face, we'll never do that. Right. That will never work.
Here we are.
And then think about what worked in a 2-week period of time. So I think that we have to preserve those lessons where it's appropriate to do so. But we also have to recognize that students are still disconnected technologically. That even if we gave them a laptop and a hotspot, that there are too many areas across our communities where service is spotty, where you're on for a moment and then all of a sudden everything blanks out. So we have to think about those things. We also have to think about employees. That was one of the things that never occurred to me, is that I would have to provide the same kinds of technological devices to employees. Because who would think that in today, that no one would have an iPhone or some kind of digital device, be it an iPad, a phone, a desktop, or anything to do their work at home. We thought that as long as we gave you the right passwords and everything, you could go home and do what you did at work. Did not happen. The number of employees who just didn't have the devices at all. So I think about it from a number of perspectives, that we've got to stay safe. And we know what we're hearing about this new sort of variant. I won't be too personal, but I'm thinking, seriously, you all had to call it the Delta variant. And that's part of Dr. Pollard and I have these other commitments in our lives where we serve too. And but I think to myself, and how do we do this within the context of ensuring that we are serving all of our community, not just those who have the financial means to be a part of the institution?
I think you raised such an important point, because there is this duality, because I think, unfortunately, oftentimes that we focus on one or the other. We say we focus on students, but oftentimes we forget about employees. Or conversely, we focus on employees and forget about the students. And then there's this whole other third group, or the people who come to us for business purposes or use our spaces for other things. And how do all of those folks think about and how we communicate and interact and make decisions that impact them? I think your observation is so important here. I think the other thing, too, for us is to understand that many of our just as we see our students as learners and also as consumers, we also have employees who are employees but also have very complex lives in and outside of the work, and how we respond to that is important. So helping them to understand and navigate the resources of the community, helping and encourage both students and employees to pursue vaccines, to understand what the impact is about our collective abilities to serve, I think is really important as a college. I think the other thing that we spend a lot of time on of late that I would draw our attention to, at least a part of our conversation here, is that, there's now being a significant amount of investment of federal and state dollars into us because they recognize the fragility of so many folks' existence. What's some advice? I know that Prince George's has led and has received a number of federal grants, and Montgomery College has received some as well. Interested in your thoughts about advice you might offer about how one navigates this space when you have this influx of dollars that are coming in that are very specific about what they could be used for. Talk to me a little bit about your experience or advice in that space, Dr. Dukes.
Well, the one thing I'll say to you is that, I left the college before we had the opportunity, so I was not part of the process for this latest influx of resources from the federal government and in some cases the state. But the one thing that I knew with the first allocations that we received back in March, April, and May was that these are not enough dollars to do the work that we are expected to do. And there was even an inequity of treatment between 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions. So what I understand now is that has been not necessarily resolved at this point, but certainly those in the Department of Education and the federal government heard us and have provided significantly more resources, some of which go to students, allow us to do it in different ways. Some of it allows us to support operations that are where students are directly impacted, even though I would suggest that students are impacted by all of our operations, whether one defines it as indirectly or directly. But I think the other thing to do is to be very deliberate about not just today in receiving those dollars, but looking out over the course of the time that we have to expend those resources. I was delighted to hear that in some cases the timeline had been extended for that, so that it gives us the opportunity to think very clearly and very strategically about how we will allocate those resources, spend them, and do so within the, and some might see them as constraints, but I would say do so within the guidelines that we've been given. But it means that we have to be thinking at this point probably about 2 years out and making decisions about what that will look like today, even though we understand that we have, maybe somewhere between 18 and 24 months in order to expend those resources. We also have to help our colleagues understand that this is one time. We have to help them. We also have to help our local and state governments understand that these are supplemental dollars. They are one time, and that they have to think about that as they continue to think about how they fund the state's community colleges and certainly the local jurisdiction's community college. So I know that I've talked to colleagues across the country where some local governments believe that they could then just defund the college because all of these resources were coming in. And luckily, they had the opportunity to engage in dialogue that says, wait a minute, this is one time. We still have operating expenses. We still want to make sure. And these dollars don't allow us to pay for everything. So I think it's connecting things to the strategic plan. I think being flexible and agile with the plan, where we have to shift and pivot, we have the wherewithal to do so. And we have the wherewithal to do so by being open and honest and transparent, candid in our communication, both with the board and with those who work at Montgomery College every day. And that helps them to see that we're not being frivolous or making spur of the moment decisions, but there is a plan here, and we are actually working the plan as we move through the next several months and several years.
I love this perspective because these are one-time dollars. And yet, and still, as you described, there's a way for us to be thinking about how we posit these dollars in such a way that they are having impact now, but also position the college for the future. And this idea of future proofing has really been something we've been talking a little bit about the college. How do we start to use these types of incidents? Rahm Emanuel once said that never waste a good crisis. And I would offer to you that this pandemic has been profound for many of us in so many different spaces. But the idea that the learnings that you talked about earlier, how do we look at what of those learnings do we retain? Which ones do we abandon? Which ones do we fortify and amplify? And one of the ones that we've been talking a lot about at the college is the workforce of the future, both in terms of composition, but also thinking about the skill sets that are necessary. And the board heard at this month's meeting, heard the first report that we're getting back as we complete phase 1 of our Siegel workforce study. And this has been I think, an extremely prescient and almost forward-thinking role that the board started this conversation a couple of years ago before we even had the crisis of the pandemics come in. But now, as a result of that, thinking about how do we position the college for the future. And I know that you've done some of this work. Could you talk a little bit about your observations about our changing workforce regionally and in higher education at large? I'd love to hear your thinking on that.
Dr. Pollard, I believe that we have to think differently about the kinds of, it used to be KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. But we have to think about what are the competencies that our workforce should be bringing, and where do we have the opportunities through professional development to help current employees gain those kinds of competencies and expectations. We have to think about what the evaluation method is, so that it is we can verify that these things are present and that they are helping to move the institution forward. We can't afford to be static institutions, and we can't afford to actually rest on the laurels of success that we've experienced in the past, because the world is changing. It's changing constantly. And as community colleges, we have to be right up there with them. You recall at one time we were known as institutions that were nimble, could respond almost on the turn of a dime, could do it quickly, and could do it very successfully. And then somewhere along the way, we became, maybe if I could say it this way, a bit full of ourselves. And that what we've got to do now is continue the work that has already begun at Montgomery College, but with that, take some really deep dives into what will it mean to be the employer of the future and the employee of the future. What does that look like? Because our space will still be in higher education. And what we need to understand that our institutions are open to our communities, and they are also businesses. So, and for some, they don't see where they look at those two notions as colliding with each other, when in reality, they are interconnected. Mm-hmm. We are a business. We accept tuition, fees,
and none of us work for free.
We procure goods, and none of us work for free. Right. So that's why we have audits, across our grants. We have audits in terms of our operational expenses. We have to we are compliance animals, because we have to comply at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. But what we also have to do is ensure that we are a machine that's running every day, and that the focus of that machine is to meet the goals that we have set. We don't set goals they say they're institutional goals, but they're really community goals, aren't they? That what we want to do, our goals are around things like enrollment and program development, employee development. If we look at it from all regional impact, partnerships with business and industry and community-based organizations. And it's because we want to see a community thrive, and that we are part of, you talk all the time about an ecosystem and where the community college fits within the context of that ecosystem. And that's what we have to be thinking. We have to continue that thinking and quite frankly, expand on it and perfect it as Montgomery College continues to grow and thrive.
I love that because that we are a part of a larger narrative. We're part of a community. As you described, the health and wellness of our community is reflective of us, and we're also reflective of the health and wealth and of our community. And I think sometimes your observation is so important, and I've said this probably not as nicely as you said it, that sometimes we've gotten so caught up in the act of who we are or the notion of who we are that we've forgotten sometimes about the work that we're supposed to be doing. So I really, really appreciate your observation. I want to end my part of this by asking you a couple fun questions that weren't on the list here because I know that some folks would love to know just a little bit about you. So let me ask you this: your favorite snack food? What's your favorite these days, anyway?
Oh my gosh, red licorice.
I didn't know that. That's a good one, though. You know what?
Yes.
It makes you feel good. Get one and keep on going. I know that
exactly.
Right now.
Well, maybe two, and keep on going.
There you go. I know you have a new love in your life, and he is he's starting to smile, and he's just growing so fast. So I'd love to you tell the audience about your new love of your life.
So I have a 6-month-old grandson, Quincy Robert Dukes. He was born on December the 4th, and I was brave enough, because he is my first grandchild, to actually travel to Los Angeles. And I was there when he was born. Now, we watched virtually. We couldn't go to the hospital, but we watched virtually. So I'm so excited for Maurice and Chaisa and Quincy Roberts. So I am doing things that I thought I would never do, and that is showing friends and family and colleagues pictures all the time. And the good thing now is they come with video, so you can hear him gurgle and laugh. And at Montgomery College, you'll get to know him. Trust me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I just think that's one of the best parts of this part of the journey, is being able to share a portion of yourself with the college community, but also have this new love. I mean, they bring such a level of joy and engagement that I'm just so happy for you and the college to get to experience that with you, because there are a whole lot of new grandparents, newer, or even just grandparents, period, at the college, and they're forever showing off pictures of the grandbaby. So that'd be a wonderful bonding experience for you and others.
Exactly. So my son has been relegated to number 2 now.
I know.
Because Quincy is number 1.
Isn't it amazing how that happens? I said that the same thing about my father. I could tell the moment that as soon as Miles came along, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, so much for you all. He would call and talk to him and not talk to us. I was like, now, how does that work? Can I get a hi? Can I get a hello? So wait till he can start talking on the phone. You'll be calling to talk to him. Oh, that's so awesome. So then let me ask you, any great plans for the rest of the summer? I know that you will hopefully be spending some time with your mother as well, but I'm hopeful that at least before we get into the grind of the academic year and we're all opening back up after COVID, are you having anything fun you're going to be doing this summer?
I'll do a few things, probably not as expansive as I would like to, as things are still opening up, but I'll take a couple of long weekend trips to New York. I'll be in Atlanta for a few days and the like. So I'll do a few things. And then there are 1 or 2 things scheduled during the fall as well. So we'll make those things happen. When I retired, what I wanted to do was take a 3-month trip by train across the country. I wanted to travel the entire United States and spend a few days here, a few days there. And I certainly hope that will be the case sometime in the early spring of 2022, because that has been something that's always been on my bucket list. I do like to travel by train. And for some, I know they would say, how could you be on the train that long? But looking at the changing landscapes and whatnot has always been something that I've enjoyed, and just what I call the calmness of it all. So I'm hoping that will happen within this next year.
Oh, I'm hopeful. And I think that's a great, the English teacher, and you also will appreciate some of the best novels of American literature have been written on trains, or about trains. So I think that you'll enjoy that. You can put that on your to-do list. You can write the novel, this inside of you on the train across the country starting next year. That'd be funny.
Okay, so from one English major to the other, that's a lot. That's asking a lot of me, Dr. Pollard.
No pressure. No pressure, Dr. Dukes. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for two things. One, for accepting the board's invitation to step into this role. Montgomery College will only become stronger and more effective around its mission with your leadership. You bring such profound experience. You bring such insight, humor, humility that I just know everyone, if they don't know you, is going to absolutely fall in love with you the way that so many of us are in this space. And then secondly, just thank you for joining me here today. This is my last video message to the college community, but it has been a wonderful love affair, and it brings me such comfort and joy to know that my dear friend and someone who the board respects tremendously is going to be able to lead the college as it goes through a search for the permanent president, but know that nothing's going to stop. The work is still going to be done, and Dr. Dukes is going to bring her own wonderful flair and leadership style to it. So thank you on both fronts from the deepest parts of my heart, Charlene.
Thank you, Darian. And I will say to you that what I will do is follow in your footsteps in terms of the energy and the commitment and the vigor that you've shown just across all of the ways in which we've gotten to know each other. And I know that you are just a speed dial away as I need to have the opportunity to speak with you. But I have already engaged with the senior administration, and I can see already just how great this experience will be, and that we will ensure, the whole of Montgomery College will ensure that the institution moves to the next permanent president in a way in which you would have expected, and that we will respect that as we think about you and, again, the legacy that you've left here in the state of Maryland. It is in so many ways unparalleled, and I am honored to call you not just my colleague, but you know it, my sister friend.
The feeling is mutual, sister friend. With that, to our Montgomery College community, both inside and outside, thank you so much for joining us today. I expect you all to take great care of Dr. Dukes, as well as you've taken such great care of me for the last 11 years. And more importantly, look forward to reading and continue to support Montgomery College, because I will be doing that, as I am a forever fan of this phenomenal institution. You all have a good one, and thanks for joining us here today. Take care and be well.